The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
I'm Brittany Warner with RealAgriculture.com, and welcome to another episode of Canola School. For this episode, we caught up with Tom Wolf. He is the owner of Agrimetrix Research and Training based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and of course is an expert on all things spraying. We chatted with Tom about different ways that you can conserve your pesticide this year. All right, Tom, so we are talking pesticides, and can you tell us what are the top 3 ways to conserve or stretch pesticide products, and should you even try to stretch those pesticide products?
Yeah, that's a really important question, especially in the era of shortages and higher costs. So I think it's running through a lot of farmers' minds what to do about that. I guess let's look at it 2 different ways. In the first way, there is a lot of product that we waste just through inefficient plumbing on our sprayers.
Right.
So for example, when we prime our boom, we have to essentially dump product on the ground. We blow out the boom ends, that kind of a thing. And we might waste 30, 40, 50 gallons on that process. That's 3 to 5 acres worth or more, and that's a significant amount of material. We also have issues with cleaning out. You know, we sometimes fill our tank a little bit higher than we should because we don't want to run out on the last tank. And then what do we do with that product? Can we actually still use that elsewhere, or do we essentially have to spray that or dump it out as well? Mm-hmm. So paying attention to your plumbing. A recirculating boom is one of the best ways to save product during priming. A continuous rinse system and maybe a better, more accurate tank gauging system are all really important for just making the best use of what you already have. Mm-hmm. The second way of looking at it is to make the spray more efficient. So I think in today's climate with availability and cost, everyone's thinking about shaving rates possibly. So the high cut on that is we don't recommend going off-label on rates, but we do all know that there's a little bit of room to move depending on the conditions, and that's the key word, the conditions. If you want to go a little bit lower on the rates, you do have to pay attention to that. So are difficult to control weeds present in your field? Accurate scouting. What are the growth stages? Can you get away with a lower rate because of growth staging? So that means early removal is probably a very good idea. Mm-hmm. What about grassy weeds? In order for the product to work well with grassy weeds, you may have to go to a finer spray. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that means now more drift potential. What does that mean? It means probably you can't spray as many hours in the day. So we have another kind of cost coming in, and that is the opportunity cost of not being out there because it's too windy. Is the weather going to turn bad tomorrow? Did you miss that opportunity? Or are you going to have to wait 5 days to get back to that field? And what does that cost? That's a yield loss cost. Right. And then other things like water quality becomes more important. If your water is a little bit hard or has bicarbonates in it, when you shave rates, that becomes more important. And so you do have to make sure you water test and do the appropriate mitigation with water conditioning and so forth.
Absolutely. And talking stretching pesticide products, what's your take on that, Tom? Should we even try to, and what does that look like for farmers?
I think first of all, I would look at the label closely and say, many products do have multiple rates already for different weed stages or different weed species. Mm-hmm. And let's explore the label. Liberty, glyphosate, top products all have that. We use the higher rates for more difficult to control weeds or later growth stages. If you can time your spraying to avoid those situations, then you have an opportunity to use the lower recommended label rate. So that's actually an opportunity. If you think about it, even glyphosate, when it first came on stream as a burn-off, on the glyphosate original label, we had 1/3 of a liter recommended. And we don't use that rate anymore. We now use a 3/4 liter or a full liter rate equivalent, much higher rate. But those original low label rates are still on the label. Certainly there's maybe a smaller subset of weeds, and maybe those weeds are smaller, but it's still you can actually expect to get good annual weed control with a lower rate. So read the label carefully and take it from there.
Now, and final point here, Tom, with conserving those pesticides, I mean, you could be saving money in the amount that you're paying for the pesticides or how far that pesticide is going to take you. But as we just talked about, you're going to have to make up for that in other ways, and that is going to be time and other considerations that you're going to have to dial in on. If you had to make a recommendation to each individual farm, would that be farm by farm basis, whether you can afford to take that time, or how would you suggest making that decision?
Yeah, it is a farm by farm basis. Let's face it, the label rate is designed to accommodate a number of different conditions, right, across a large ecozone with different weather conditions and other things that happen. And so we've been able to take advantage of that sort of built-in buffer by using low drift sprays, for example. And the lower coverage that those sprays sometimes offer hasn't really had an impact on control because we've had a slightly maybe luxurious rate.
Right.
If we cut the rate, we probably can't use those sprays. And what does that really mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean that we essentially can only spray half the time that we were able to spray before? And what is the actual cost of that long term?
Right.
I think that's a big issue. The other one is, of course, the development of resistance. So there's a certain kind of resistance called polygenic resistance that takes advantage of slight differences in survivability of individual wheat species. And those survivors are going to be brought to the forefront with a lower rate.
Mm-hmm.
And then those survivors then can cross-pollinate and produce offspring that are maybe even more resistant than their parents were. And over time, then we have this thing called polygenic resistance, and even their label rate won't work anymore.
So when we are talking about, conserving pesticides, making it go farther to save some money, are there other costs associated with doing that farmers should consider? And how does one go about making that decision? Is it a farm by farm basis, or are there some hard and cut rules to try to conserve that pesticide or stretch it?
Yeah, there's certainly costs associated with stretching herbicide and reducing the rate. I mean, the first one is you might actually have lower control than you want. Mm-hmm. And you have to make certain adjustments for that. So pay attention to water quality and spray quality. And if you pay attention to spray quality, the second downside comes into play, and that is you might actually have less hours to spray in a day. You might not get your spraying done in a timely manner because you're drift prone. You might actually also have angry neighbors. It's also a possibility. And finally, you have that possibility of the onset of or the development of certain kinds of resistance that comes out of not quite controlling all the weeds equally well.
Great. Thanks so much, Tom.